The Timeshift.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Timeshift. This week I'm reviewing the latest episode of Doctor Who titled 73 Yards, and we're going to be kicking off with this particular review, as we always do with these reviews, by talking about the story, the writing and tangentially related matters. Just a quick heads up, I do have the window open, so if you hear any kind of weird noises, it's coming from outside, it's not coming from me. With that said, to actually talk about the story itself, well, this week the Doctor has once again put his foot well and truly in it. I will admit that between this episode and the previous one, it's going to be a hot old battle as to see which one is going to be my favourite of this season. That is something I will discuss in the season-long review in a few weeks' time. This episode, whilst it was slightly more mystical in nature, it does still play with science fiction conventions very well. The pacing is good, not great. I think that Millie Gibson is given a hell of a time to play to her strengths, and I think the episode itself is able to shift gears decently well. I don't think the gear shift is perfectly done, but I think it does what it needs to, at least on a very mechanical level. I will admit that I and many other commentators online feel that this episode might become more significant later on this season. This episode might not be quite as much of a standalone story as it first appears. I will admit, though, I'm not going to speculate as to what may be happening and how it may be significant later on. Let's be honest, everyone's going nuts about Susan Twist, this recurring actor we've had thus far this season. And I will be blunt, I'm not going to address all that stuff because, quite frankly, I don't want to. I feel that talking about that stuff takes us away from the quality of the episodes in and of themselves, and means we're spending more time talking about things that may never happen than actually the stuff that actually has happened. And this episode had an air of a good ghost story to it, at least for the first half. Pretty much everything up until the moment of the pasty delivery, I think the tone and feeling of all of that was just brilliant. This dark, creepy, horror-focused story. I really did enjoy. I loved every single moment of it, and then it switched out. And I'm going to admit, I am in two minds about that. I loved the vibe of it all. I loved the feeling of it. I loved just how creepy and sinister and insidious everything up until the big switch of gears moment felt. It was brilliant. But on the other hand, let's be honest, had this episode just gone the direction that we thought it was going to do, we could pretty much see the entire thrust of the episode thereafter. Had this entire episode just been Ruby trying to survive this weird alien entity whilst being in a pub with all these other characters, you can see what will be happening there. People will be picked off one by one. Eventually it would just be Ruby and someone else left alive that either solve the mystery, or right at the last moment the Doctor would swoop in, save the day, and maybe there'd be a little bit of a moment where Ruby gets mad at the Doctor, kind of like at the end of Kill the Moon. God, I shouldn't really think about that episode. We'll move on swiftly. But, you know, you can kind of see where that kind of episode would go. This kind of a dark horror episode with the Doctor being absent from it. And that's not what we ended up getting. We got something that was a lot less predictable, which is commendable. It's averted expectations in a good way, even if I will say is that I did love the suspense that was building up over that initial time period. I like the dark and more horror-afflicting episodes of Doctor Who when they're dealing with a threat that is just beyond their comprehension. Like the whole cosmic horror stuff that we started to get into during the Fourth Doctor's time, or the more conventional, slightly a few steps down from Hammer horror stuff that we got during the Second Doctor's time. And whilst this all stuff was kicking off, there was a part of me that was really lamenting the fact that this episode was broadcasting during the summertime, because I could just imagine just sitting in my room, just sitting in front of my computer and watching this whilst it's dark outside, while it's wet and windy and cold and nasty outside, and just how that would end up adding to this atmosphere and this creepy sense to everything. I would have loved that if that was the case. But of course it isn't. It's the middle of summer, it's getting rather warm, and, well, it's bright out, and at the end of the day, this didn't turn into the horror episode that I thought it was going to do. That whole tone and feeling fades off pretty much the moment that the pasty delivery arrives, and we start to transition into something different. And it just becomes Ruby trying to make sense of this entity that's following her. And I will admit, whilst there are certain people that certainly have said they think that opening quarter or half is certainly stronger, I still feel as though the second half is good for what it is, but there are a few issues here and there that I do think that undermine it and hold it back a little bit. I will be perfectly honest, and this might be a nitpicky thing, but I've just got to be honest about it, and just say is that I don't think the horror of it really works that well in the daytime. I understand that, you know, the creature's always following her, the entity is always following her, so you can't always have scenes that take place at night. Eventually, you know, just from an audience point of view, we're going to get sick of it, it's going to lose its effectiveness. But maybe at the very least they could have used a few different locations. Like we have the moment where Ruby meets up with the Brigadier and they're just sat at a cafe in anywhere the hell, wherever the hell UK. And I really don't find the image of someone stood in the background doing BSL out of focus in broad daylight as creepy as someone doing the exact same thing outside in the dark like we get in the first half of it. It looks so unremarkable that I think that it doesn't quite work for me, and just the sheer number of times that we get someone going up to the entity and then being freaked out by it, then we get it again and again and again, and each time it loses something from it. Very early on in the episode, I did kind of twig that yes, it's probably going to be a version of Ruby from the future, an older version of her. So what is it that she's saying to them? Why is it that it looks like they're doing BSL, that being British Sign Language? I don't know, and that isn't really conveyed or expressed, because what she's doing, the expressions that she's doing, doesn't really seem as though it matches up with what Ruby herself is trying to say, the old version of her. But hey, I think I'm starting to get a little bit distracted here. I think that overall the shift in focus is done well. Again, not done good, not done great, but done well. This transition from being a ghost story into something resembling a slightly sci-fi afflicted political thriller works well enough. I mean, from a pure mechanical point of view, just looking at this almost from a ones and zeros point of view, it does it well. It has a nice build into it, a nice pacing into it. The joke about the future politician towards the start of it nearly causing a nuclear war, that was either going to be set up or it's going to end up just being an offhand joke. Part of me wishes it was an offhand joke, but for what we ended up getting and for how all that is put together, I think it is good. But I will admit that with all the stuff with the politician, there is a part of me that wishes that it could have gone even darker than what we ended up getting. There is a part of me that, you know, I wouldn't have been upset if Gethin Genocide, or whatever his name was, actually did push the button and a nuclear war did kick off. And then you have Ruby trying to survive this nuclear apocalypse. I think that going that extra step would have added an extra sense of desperation and edge that I think the story itself needed. Because whilst this existential idea of just being there, waiting for someone who will never come and just trying to make sense of this mystery that's following you around forever is good, I think that it is missing that edge that that earlier half of the episode really did have. And I will admit that I do feel as though everything just kind of wrapped up a little bit too neatly for my liking. The whole thing about Ruby and this weird mystery with the snow, just even after all these years she didn't figure it out and it just faded off and was never a thing for her. Yeah, okay, I get that because they don't want to spoil anything, but the fact that that itself just isn't really touched on at all, okay, apart from a little bit towards the start of the episode. Aside from that, Ruby stopped the nuclear war from starting, so it's not going to happen, or maybe it will do, or maybe it will be prevented in a future episode. To be fair, the Doctor did say that he brought the UK to the brink of nuclear war, not that he did do it, so we'll see where we end up going with that. Maybe that's what the final episode of the season is going to be about. We'll soon see about all of it, but like I say, everything tied itself up really neatly for what too much of my liking, and I'm not entirely sure as to how it was that this future version of Ruby was able to stop the previous version of her from stop her from making the Doctor step on the thing. Like, why is it different this time when it seems that though this was some kind of causality loop that was always happening? I don't know what was different this time. Maybe this was, I don't know, and people are going to debate and discuss that for ages, and I'm not going to get lost in that moment. I think the pacing of the episode overall was solid, though it does feel as though certain elements here and there were rushed. not too much and not too bad. I mean, this isn't as bad as the opening 2 episodes of this season, where it did feel as though they were just barreling through everything and just delivering as much exposition as they could do in very narrow time frames, and it just feeling a little bit too overwhelming. Here we didn't have that problem. If anything, it's just because I feel that certain moments just needed time to breathe, and we needed more time to really just take a moment to listen and understand what's going on here. You know, just get a sense of where everyone is in this given moment as the world changes around them. With that said, I think it's a good time to move on and to talk about the performances, and yes, this was very much Millie Gibson's time to shine. This is her episode, and I think that she did a perfectly commendable job. From a performance point of view, she did everything that she needed to, and everything that the script and the text commanded of her. My issue is not with her in her performance, because I think that, again, she does everything she needs to. She works with the material as much as it would let her. I feel that my issue is that she's still written like a fairly generic modern companion. She feels like a variation of Carla. As such, any kind of the hints to the skill that Gibson shows, oftentimes as though it feels as though it's cut short. She's really great at conveying this sense of hopelessness and isolation. She's great at showing this sense of stern commitment to doing the right thing, damn the costs. We see this throughout the episode, the realization that units cannot help her, this realization that her mother, her adoptive mother, wants nothing to do with her because of what the entity said to her, and just trying to make sense of everything. I like that part of her. That part of her towards the mid to end part of the episode where she decides to take down this corrupt politician, and how she's committed to that. I like that. I like the edge to her character and just how bloody minded she becomes in doing that. I think that works fantastically well for her, but time and again it ends up being diminished. It almost as though feels as though we're switching back from something that would be different and new just to go back to, okay, she's the companion and now she's going to react to situations like every other companion in the modern series would do. She has this very contemporary modern Doctor Who companion feel to her. Granted, she doesn't go down the full way of, oh golly gee shucks, let's save the day, which thankfully is not the case. It is something that is absent here but has been present in the previous few episodes of her. But again, I think that it is the limitation of the writing, not necessarily a limitation with her as an actor. This is particularly relevant when you think about how the older version of her acts, Hilary Hobson, I think she does a good performance as this older version of Ruby. Though again, it ends up illustrating the problem, because this should be the moment where we get a greater sense of the years that Ruby has lived through. This sense of longing and this sense of world weariness, this sense of hopefulness and this sense of almost resigning yourself to this mystery will never be solved. We should be getting a feel of all that, but at the end of the day we don't. We get teases of it, we get hints to it, we get feels of it, we get echoes of the person that we have come to know over the past few episodes or so, but at the same time it doesn't quite go the extra step. Maybe it's a timing thing, maybe if there was more time we could have got a better sense of that, but even still I feel that it needed to be better. That's ultimately the feeling with a lot of this, is that it just needed to be that little bit better. But with that said, as we now pivot into the overview, I think that this episode is at the very least my second favourite of this season. At the very least. It might be my favourite one of this season, we'll just have to see about that, because I do think that there is a lot to commend and a lot to celebrate with this episode. I understand it's not going to be for everyone, and I do admit that that first quarter or half, depending about how you want to cut it out, where she's just dealing with this ghostly entity in this small village in the middle of the night, I think that is the strongest element of it. And as we start to pivot away from that, I think that that darker, creepier, spooky edge is lost, and it's never really replaced with anything else. When you realise that we're going to start getting into this mad, pro-nuclear war political candidate who somehow got elected, yeah, you could see where all that was going, and at the end of the day there was three ways that was going, at least from where I could see. Either the nuclear war was going to happen, she would have to survive it, she was going to end up stopping him and then get sent to prison forever and ever and ever, possibly by killing him, or she'd find some crafty way in doing it. And they picked the crafty way, and regrettably the crafty way in this case was the least interesting option, but still was fine in and of itself. I just think that the absence of that edge and that dark tone that we ended up getting in the first quarter of it was conspicuously further into the episode that it got, but still, this was a great episode. I really did enjoy it. But again, this does end up making me feel that, yeah, Doctor Who does not play well for me during the summer. I would be probably even be more forgiving of the horror scenes in the broad daylight had it all been broadcast during the winter months. But hey, it's on the iPlayer now forever, so if I ever get nostalgic for it, I can just watch it in a few months' time. But anyway, with all that said and done, let's get into Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner! One of these days, it's going to have a cheesy jingle and you're going to love it. But anyway, time for Comment Corner, reading your comments from the previous episode, that being a review on the episode Boom. We kick off with Big X1, who says, I don't want to say it, but I am. Bring back Moffat. Thank you for your comments. This is, from what we've understood and what has been said in press releases, Stephen Moffat's penultimate episode. Of course, previously this would be his final episode, and prior to that, Twice Upon a Time was going to be his final episode, so we'll see where all that goes. I can't say I want Stephen Moffat back as a showrunner. Occasional episodes here and there I'm fine with. Not as a showrunner, please, but then I'm one of those people that didn't think that Russell T Davies should have come back. And I'm going to be honest, I think the jury's still out for me as to whether or not he should have done. But still, we're getting good stuff. The episodes themselves are still good, even if I do have this feeling of me that still thinks I would have liked a new showrunner. But hey, still, good for what it is. I'm not complaining. We've yet to have an outright terrible episode this series, which, for modern Doctor Who, is an absolute bloody miracle. But with that said, let us move on to our next comment, and this one comes from Richard Gale 1287, who says, I've always enjoyed Doctor Who seasons and eras, not in their openings episodes, regen stories, finales, or specials, but on its bottle episodes and standalones. I enjoy Doctor Who best as an anthology show, with connecting characters in a blue box. Russell T Davies as a ringmaster, with Moffat as a writer, has never let us down. And I have to say that yes, I really do enjoy that week's episode, and it does show that the two of them do work decently well together in what we see. As has been said and hinted at over the years, the showrunner does have a bit of a hand within the writing of the episode, so Russell T Davies does get a bit of credit where credit is due with helping that particular episode. And I will admit that when it comes to talking about Doctor Who, particularly in the modern era, it does kind of irritate me that I have to talk about it in the sense of eras, and I have to talk about it in the sense of big storylines and convoluted plot threads, but that's just sadly the nature of the beast these days. But still, thank you for your comment, and I am happy that you enjoyed that episode. And finally, we get a comment from Dr. Eric Nefarious, who says, what's this? A Moffat episode about a countdown? Yes, it was. It was an episode about a countdown to destruction. Which, unless I'm mistaken, and just a little light just flicked on in the back of my mind, isn't that the name of a classic Doctor Who episode? I think it is. This will be a nice time to cut to a clip to it, but I can't do that because of copyright. Thank you! Anyway, thank you all for your comments. Let me know what you thought about this particular episode in the comment section down below. Let me know if you loved it. Let me know if you hated it. If you did love it and you loved the previous one, which would you say is your favourite? I'm curious to see about where all that's concerned. It might get referenced when we do the big season review in a few weeks' time. You know, it just occurred to me that we are now officially halfway through this year's season, even though we're 3 weeks into it, because of the double bill on the Eurovision Saturday. Wow. Anyway, still, that's an interesting fact. Something that I probably will reflect upon when we talk about this series as a whole in a few weeks' time. Anyway, thank you all for listening, and see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!